Hello and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We thank you for joining us for this episode. Reminder: Moonshine Jesus Show is brought. excuse me. Reminder: Moonshine Jesus Show is brought to you by ProgressiveChristianity.org. We certainly hope that you will go and check out all the incredible resources there, as well as make sure you follow Moonshine Jesus Show on Facebook, on Twitter, and any place that you get your podcast. I am joined today with my good buddy Caleb. Caleb, how you doing?
I'm doing great today, Mark. A nice winter day in San Diego. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today as well. I don't want to hear about a winter day in San Diego that doesn't get below 65 degrees. That's fine, whatever. I am excited though. What I do want to hear about is what you're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about Disney's Willow, the follow-up to a movie that came out 32 years ago. And our cocktails, I don't know about you, I had a difficult time seeing anything that was out there that people had done. I'm not surprised that no one's really thought through what to do for a cocktail on Willow. But so that makes me very curious about what you decided to do with this.
Yeah, so I didn't take inspiration from anyone else. I took inspiration from the main drink that we see in Willow, what I'm calling worm juice. So the orangey yellow liquid that has some relationship with the worm that we're not really super clear on what it is, but it somehow marks this person's decision to follow the worm. And so I guess by drinking this today, that's what I'm going to be doing. I've got an
my goodness, I'm worried about this.
I know, right? Who knows what direction this podcast is going to turn after I drink this. So I'm just drinking a classic mimosa today, Mark.
Lovely.
Orange juice and champagne. But it is this nice orangey yellow color, just like the worm juice.
That works pretty well for worm juice. That's a creative way of approaching it. I took a really easy way out. I just went with the name Willow, and I'm stealing a cocktail from a completely different movie. From the Harry Potter series, there's a cocktail called a Whomping Willow, which is the big tree that caught the car. That was the Whomping Willow. It is 2 parts vodka, 2 parts sour apple liqueur, and a half part lime juice, and it comes out with this really quite lovely greenish tint.
Yes.
I'm very curious to try it, though. I'm worried that it's going to be way too sweet and way too sour all at the same time.
Let's see.
It's okay. Yes, much better than I anticipated. It'll be good to have during the show for sure. How's your mimosa?
Well, I'm ready to.
Are you
always gotta love a mimosa? I'm ready to devote my life to the worm now.
I was wondering if you're already communing with the worm. I'm worried about where this will take the show, but we have no choice but to continue on and see where it may lead us, particularly you. So thank you all again for being with us. We will catch you on the other side of this drop.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're going into our geeking out section where we're going to geek out about the movie Willow, and then later on we'll talk about the theology and the politics of this show. Willow is the Disney Plus fantasy adventure television series based on and serving as a sequel to the 1988 film of the same name. It has been nearly 17 years since Queen Bavmorda was defeated. An unlikely group of 6 heroes sets off on a dangerous quest to places far beyond their home where they must face their inner demons and come together to save the world from the Gales. An epic adventure, if ever I've heard one. So, Mark, I know that you love fantasy kind of stuff, and I'm curious, were you a fan of the 1988 movie? Have you seen that? And if so, how do you think this did as a continuation of the story?
Yeah, I was a big fan of the 1988 movie, and for a long time was just always waiting. Is there going to be a sequel? Is there going to be a sequel? I vaguely remember a trilogy of books coming out afterwards that kind of followed Laura Dannon in her teen years a little bit, and I can't remember if I read it. I feel like I did a little bit. It doesn't matter now because this new series kind of makes that not part of canon anymore. Since Laura Dannon, as we learned, didn't know that she was a Laura Dannon for a while there. I think they did a really nice job of updating it and giving it a contemporary relevance. I also like the fact that it was made in 1988, the movie, and so there wasn't much diversity going on there. And I thought they did a really nice job of bringing diversity back into the storyline and making a lot of folks who were definitely not present in the first in terms of groups of folks that are marginalized being very present and very important in the storyline. So I was kind of a fan of it, and I liked that they turned up the humor on it. It's a much more humorous take, even though there's plenty of action and plenty of things to kind of be tense about. They do this wonderful job of breaking it up with humor. So I've enjoyed that a lot. How about you? What's your history with it? And what did you think about this new approach? They're calling it Volume 2.
So I had never seen Willow, and I still have not seen the movie Willow.
Oh,
so what I know about Willow is what they gave me at the very beginning of the series is kind of a recap of the movie. My wife loved the movie, and so we watched this whole thing together, and she kind of filled me in on what happened in the movie.
Nice.
So oddly enough, I had no experience with it. I enjoyed it. I felt like it took a few episodes to really figure out what it was doing, and I felt like the actors were all pretty new, and I think some of them, maybe the actress who was playing Alora in particular, it took a little while to figure out the character, and maybe that had something to do with the fact that there were a couple of characters where it seemed like they were one person, and then about halfway through the series we find out they're really someone else. And maybe that's part of what that confusion was about, or that a little bit of soft footing it felt like it was about. But I felt like all in all it was good. A good series.
I can see that. And part of it might be, and I don't remember the full details of it, but this started filming right as COVID hit. And so getting into those characters, it's hard to say, did they film a little bit and then got completely shut down? And so there was some separation from the character and the character development. I don't know. But that could have been part of it. But I agree. I felt like some of the characters, the actors and actresses clearly weren't as identifying as strongly early on. And for sure, I agree. They took too long to get the story going. And then somewhere around, I think it was episode 5, they really didn't do anything. They just kind of hung out and had a good time and partied, and it didn't move the storyline. And I was like, when you're already struggling with getting this story going and getting people to buy into it, how do you just do nothing for an episode? I mean,
that's
do you
hilarious.
Yes.
Okay. So it's hilarious that you would identify that episode as the one that is like the stall, because that's the episode where I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can get into this show. I don't know why, but there's something about that. I think
it's so much.
It's in that episode. It's in that episode where we kind of find out, who the characters are a little bit more, and I felt like maybe they were leaning into that. I'm like, okay, well, this is why it was so shaky, and so that was the episode where I'm like, I actually kind of enjoyed that. I want to see what happened. The episode that did it for me, Mark, was the next to the last episode, I think, where they spent, I would say, half to 3/4 of the episode trudging across the sea. I mean, it felt like we were literally going on that adventure with them. And I
Yeah.
I thought this has to be torture for them because it's kind of torture for me to watch them day after day going through this sea. Okay,
Yeah,
here's
I
the
get that.
yeah.
I get that. I wonder if some of that, particularly for a couple of characters like Graydon, I wonder if some
Yeah.
of that wasn't doing exactly what you said episode 5 did for you in terms of
Yeah.
it was building up the characters in a way that you could connect with them and identify with them, even though it wasn't necessarily moving the story along. I do think, particularly some of the things we see Graydon do, I have a suspicion that they may have been fleshing his character out because we really didn't get a lot of that in his character, but his character all of a sudden becomes very important in the story. And so
Yeah.
I wonder if that's not part of what was going on.
Yeah, yeah, and I bet that's something maybe we'll talk about later. Is his
Yeah.
character more because it seems like they've set him up during the next season to play a different kind of and maybe more important role. As
Absolutely.
we're talking about the characters, Mark, I think the big character we've got to talk about is that Mad Mardigan, Val Kilmer, is
Right.
not in this series really. In the same way.
Right.
Do you think it worked without him?
I think Borman kind of gave us a little bit of that character. So I do think that it worked enough. I don't think, though, that we're necessarily not going to see him show up in this. We know we're going to get another set, at least another season. We weren't sure when the whole season started, but it was wildly popular. So we know that we're going to get that. I think we're going to see him again. I don't think it really hurt not bringing him in. I kind of get, well, Val Kilmer, with how much of a star he is at this point, might have been waiting to see, is this done well? Is it successful? And that's one of the things we need to talk about is the quality of this show was off the charts. Whether you thought like they developed the characters fast enough or told the story fast enough, the scenery, they did so much on live locations, which were incredible. The CGI work was incredible. The special effects were all wonderful. It was just a beautifully shot and really incredibly well directed series, I thought. And so I think they've proven themselves. I think we could get Val to show up. And I think I remember reading an interview at one point that he said he's not ruling it out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I know you aren't really familiar with his character from the original, but
Yeah.
your wife, what was her kind of take on him not being in it?
Yeah, so she felt like it worked well, and that he was referenced. We got to hear from the character, at different points, which I think made it feel connected. And I know
Right.
Val Kilmer's own health is probably a lot of that.
Absolutely.
And if he does come in the future, it may be a similar kind of role like he had in Top Gun Maverick, where it's kind of a cameo that explains why his character can't be there
Right.
anymore. We get to say goodbye in some
Yeah.
kind of a way. So, but I agree with you about the set piece. I mean, one of the reasons we want to watch fantasy is to go into another world. And
Yeah.
a lot of times the places where fantasy films or TV series falls short is really creating another world. And this does create another world for us. It's
Yeah.
going somewhere else. We get to experience this new place. There was some great world building. We got to go on an epic adventure. We got to see a lot of different places, and there were a lot of places alluded to that we didn't get to see. So
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's fun. I think that they left a lot of possibilities for things that they can do in the next season, and I think they did a great job of making us want to see how the story continues. Do you have thoughts about what do you think is going to happen in the next season, Mark?
Well,
what do you think we have to look forward to?
I do think that it's going to be really interesting. I think they're going to set us up for some possible character twists that don't, in my opinion, probably aren't going to show up. I don't want to reveal too much because one of my questions that I've got might be related to this. So I'm really not for our make me look stupid segment. So
I'm trying to take your question, Mark.
I
want
know.
you to. I want you
This
to
is-
give all the answers
You
right
just
now.
you just keep doing this to me, man. I don't understand. That's why I'm always prepared with 2 now. But I think that they've been very careful, even though they weren't sure. They did a great job about not knowing while they were filming this if there was going to be a second season, because you both get right at almost the very end of the last episode, as they're all walking back across the big shallow lake, and the behind the scenes shot from the back, we see them walking away, and then you get that nice little freeze frame, and it's sort of reminiscent of how the Willow movie ended. So they gave us kind of a conclusion, but then they gave that little tag where we get to see Graydon's character and what's happening to him. So they gave us just enough to say, if there is another season, here's some interesting things going on that could play a major role. And we also have, well, we can talk about some of the other stuff. So I think they did a really great job of setting it up. It's also why I think that they gave Graydon a little more in the penultimate episode. They gave him a little more time and a little more character development. I think there's some really interesting things that could go on with it.
I think so too. That's one of the challenges, right, of a first season, especially something like this. That I mean, Willow kind of has a cult following, but it's not immensely popular, I don't think. And so it's a bit of a risk. And so doing something that feels like closure, but also adds possibility for the future and world expansion is important. One of the other characters I want to talk about before we leave this segment is Willow himself, Warwick Davis. And so one of the interesting things I think about Willow is that it stars a little person, Warwick Davis, right? But it doesn't make a huge deal out of that aspect of who he is. That's just part of what the character is, and he's a star of the show. How do you feel about that approach in Hollywood films? I mean, he's also playing. He's also not playing a little person, but a subset of people in this universe. So, what do you think about that approach?
Oh, I really like what they've done, and I really like, as you pointed out, that they don't call attention to, like, it'd be so easy to play into the old trope of yes, he's a small person, but he can do big things, and they don't do any of that. He just happens to come from a group of folks who are the height that he is, and I think it was really set up well. George Lucas is the one he wrote the original screenplay Willow for Warwick Davis. Like, it was all because he had worked with him on Star Wars, really liked him, thought he was a great actor, and wanted to give him a starring role of some sort and wrote the whole thing for him. And I think it was really thought out well. They started in the original movie. They did the same thing where it wasn't anything about his size, and that would have been so easy to go to. So I think they handled it in a very respectful way, and more in the way that the world should operate. It's just to see people as people and value them for who they are and what they do. It's I mean, what was your take?
I like that. If only we could just do that. See people for who they are, and not try to define them based on looks or certain attributes about ethnicity or cultural kinds of things. If we could just view people for who they are. So that is something that I really liked about this, and that really stood out for me. So, hey, Mark, we could geek out about this for a long time. There's a whole lot here. We had 8 episodes, and we built on the movie. But you know what? There are also a lot of theological and political overtures in this series, and we need to get into talking to those. So let's take a quick break, and let's come back and let's talk about the theopolitico stuff in Willow.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for our Theopolitico segment. As we continue to look at part two of Willow, the series from Disney. So one of the big questions that I'd like to talk about is something that Willow alludes to, doesn't really allude to it. He kind of directly says that that in the universe there's this balance that exists between light and
Mhm.
shadow and good and evil, and that when the balance is broken, the universe itself has to step in to correct it. Um, I'm wondering what you think about that kind of moral outlook, and even from a theological perspective. Is there any truth behind that? Is any reality behind that? And what is the universe's role when that, if it's even a thing, when it gets out of balance? Is there a role of the universe that has to bring it back into balance? Is there something wrong with it leaning like too far towards the good? I don't know, but he seemed to imply that it had to remain in perfect balance for it to be wrong.
So there were several things throughout the series that struck me as kind of Taoist, because there
Mm,
was also a lot of talk about magic running through the universe and being
right?
connected to the magic. And if you're in tune with it, then you can do with what the magic is leading you to do. There was a lot of that kind of talk throughout the series, and so
Hmm.
it struck me as a really Taoist kind of thing, because that's the
Yeah,
understanding, right? That if you're open to the Tao, the way that the universe kind of naturally directs you
yeah.
into what you're doing. And where you get into trouble is whenever you stop going along with the universe's flow. There's this theory that the universe kind of naturally pushes you, and you need to be open to
Hmm.
whatever the universe is
Right.
pushing you towards, and you shouldn't fight against that. And so I think there is truth to that. That there is be an openness, like if you're open to things that are happening in your life, you might call it Tao, you might call it God, you might call it the universe, you
Hmm.
might call it vibes. Well, I don't know, whatever it is. I think that
Right.
there is something that if you allow yourself to be open to it, open to what is going on naturally around you, and you allow yourself to kind of experience that, that
Hmm.
that is something that is true, and that sometimes we cause suffering, or we cause even moral wrongdoing from trying to fight that is naturally happening.
Mm.
As far as the universe stepping in when things get out of balance, I don't know that the universe steps in. I think it's more that we have to step
Right.
in when things get out of balance, and especially if things get out of balance on the bad side of things, that we have to step in and, like Martin Luther King Jr. said, right, bend the moral arc of the universe
Right.
back towards justice, back towards good. What did you think of that whole
Well,
line
I,
of
I
thinking
actually
about it?
found that kind of perspective. Like it shows up a lot in fantasy, and it's
Hmm.
fine. But I think one of the great things about fantasy is that you get to move into a different world and experience and think
Hmm.
about things without the trappings of our world that might bend our way of thinking in one direction or
Hmm.
another.
Hmm.
This one is one of the tropes that I really find the least helpful,
Hmm.
because it does seem to suggest that there needs to be this balance between good and evil in the universe. And for me, like the folks that I look up to the most to
Hmm.
in our real world are the folks that are trying to bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice, that are trying to create more good in the world so that there is a balance that leans more towards good and less towards evil. And I would like to see a fantasy show that talks about the necessity of that for survival, that we have to be not in balance, but we need to be leaning towards and building towards the good that can be, and recognizing the good. They do such a great job in this show of recognizing the good. Matter of fact, it's this constant theme of their little band of six folks who are out to try to rescue
Hmm.
Eric. um, it's constant theme of someone doubting themselves, and then someone else within the party saying, I believe in you, You can do this. We can make it better. And so there's this constant call that defines the group of leaning towards good and building off of good. But then they all of a sudden have this discussion about how there has to be a balance. And for me, I don't see that at all, and I definitely don't think the universe will step in to correct it in any way.
Yeah.
I would suspect that the universe is somewhat indifferent about our doings,
Yeah.
and that it's up to us to do that kind of work. I would love to see a fantasy show that really pushes that it's important to build on good and to have more good.
Yeah, yeah. I like that, Mark, and I'm thinking too in terms of like liberation theology. And so one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that we often want a grand liberation, like the universe. We want the universe to step in and do a great deal of good for us. That's
Right.
That's one issue that I have with liberation theology, is that the liberation theology tends to have this narrative that God is going to come in and
Right.
liberate all of God's people in one fell swoop. And if we look at history, it doesn't seem like that really happens a lot.
No.
And the way it often seems like it happens is through little liberations and dedicated people winning hard fought fights. So like the Exodus from Egypt, right? There's no historical evidence that ever happened, but there is historical evidence that several small exoduses happened over the period of several centuries. And so if we look to that to inform a theory of revolution or of liberation, then it's talking about God liberating people through their own actions, through dedicated work over an extended period of time. And it's hard fought fight. So I'm with you. That's to say, I don't think that the universe comes in and sweeps things out, but it is us through our dedicated actions that changes things. So maybe Mark, if you want to see that, maybe you need to create your own fantasy.
Fantasy,
show.
who knows? I'll do it in my
Yeah.
spare time. It'd be
Good.
great.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure
So
you've got a lot of it.
I want to shift gears a little bit right now. One of the things that struck me, and I guess this usually does when I see it in any movie, really, is Laura Dannon. It finds out who she is and who she's supposed to be, how she's supposed to play a big important role. And there's a point at which she's breaking down, and she goes, "I don't want to be a Laura Dannon." For me, that reminds me so much of call stories, because in a lot of ways, she's being called to be this person. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about the reoccurrence in call stories of folks saying, "Not me." Even in talking to other ministers' friends, it's amazing the number of times that a minister was having some feeling that maybe ministry was the thing they should do, but ultimately kept going, here's the reason why I shouldn't do it, and why someone else should do it, and that kind of thing. So I'm curious why you think that happens, and what we'll then move into what happens when she finally accepts her call. But first of all, let's talk about the denying of a call story, where that comes from, and why do we think that happens?
I think that in this series, and whenever we see that in movies or in stories or something like that, we see that to add a touch of drama to where will this person fulfill their destiny, in quotes, or not. And certainly we see that in the Bible as almost a prerequisite, especially for prophets being called, that they have to have some kind of a struggle with God. And I think in a lot of church traditions, people don't consider a call to be valid unless you've had some kind of a struggle with God. And so I think sometimes people are trained into that. And maybe this is just me speaking out of my experience, because I didn't really have a situation like that where I felt like I had to wrestle with God as to whether or not I was being called. A lot of times whenever I've heard people struggle with their call to ministry, like, well, I thought maybe I shouldn't do this, and I didn't know if I was supposed to do this or not. sometimes I've thought, well, maybe that is your intuition telling you that this isn't a good idea, and maybe
Hey,
maybe you
careful
should
now.
listen to it.
Careful now. I went through that, so I don't know. Maybe
I
you're
get
right.
it.
Maybe-
I'm not saying
maybe I-
it's for
maybe I
everybody,
should've
Mark. But I am saying that sometimes there are people who have said, "Yeah, maybe I should have gone into ministry," and I've thought, well, maybe you should have. Maybe you shouldn't have gone. Maybe.
I feel like I'm getting called out all of a sudden. I don't know. This is for me. I think. I see almost the and I guess experience has a lot to do with it in terms of personal experience. I see almost the opposite of it. Yeah, in the movie they do it for drama. But they also do it because there is something romantic, and I think also I intellectually important about a person who's being called towards something that's that big, not just wishing hard. Oh, I've got to have that, because you don't necessarily want that kind of influence and power to go in the hands of an egomaniac who desperately wants to be in that kind of place. So there is something about character building in movies to have a character go through that, to say, okay, I feel comfortable with this person moving into that, because they really kind of recognize that there's something in them that doesn't necessarily want to have that kind of responsibility and that kind of power. And I think that can also, I don't think you're incorrect that sometimes you should trust your intuition. But I think it also sometimes can be reflective of a person who is recognizing that whatever it is that they feel like they should be moving towards in their life is a big deal, and that they're doubting whether or not they want to take all of that on, and there is a bit of this. Here's me talking about me being humble. There's a bit of humility in recognizing that is a lot of power, and I don't know if I'm the person that should have it. And then going through and grappling with whether or not that should work, in a lot of ways, I think can help a person become a very good leader, because they come at it from a place of a little bit of humility and recognizing how important what they're doing is.
That's a good point, Mark. And in all seriousness, Matt Flooding has written a lot about this. It's a book called Flourishing in Ministry. And there are 3 different paths that he's identified through research to the ways that people enter ministry. And so, for instance, I entered into ministry through a gradual call, like a gradual realization, and early in life. But there are other types of calls that people have, and one is like a sudden realization, like especially in Pentecostal type churches where people have a real vivid God experience that feels like a conversion. And the second one, I think, is, or because that's the third kind. I think the second kind is a realization that you're in the wrong kind of field, and often a struggle with God and with yourself. And this whole different conception of yourself is a really natural path. And I think the second path that they identified to ministry. And so I think you're right that it's important to also recognize a variety of ways that people come into ministry and how that helps them be better suited for different types of ministries.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, we could go on and on about that. And I had 2 or 3 more kind of theological questions I was wanting to pick your brain on. But look, we dug in pretty deep on a couple of them, and I really have appreciated the conversation. But it is time for us to take another break so that we can come back to one of our favorites, if not favorite segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment.
Hello and welcome to our final segment of the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we are talking about Willow, and we are going to try to ask each other questions to make our co-hosts look stupid. And so I have a question for you about Graydon, Mark, but it kind of sounded like you had a question for me about Graydon. And so I'm not
That's
sure.
all
So
right.
here's what
It might be
here's
the
what I'm gonna
same
do.
question, but I got backups. I'm used to you stealing my questions, so go for it.
Well, here's the thing, Mark.
Yeah.
Since it sounds like maybe we might be thinking similar things, I'm going to let you ask your question first. Since I have stolen your question in the past, I'm going to let you go first this time.
We are both way too nice of guys, because here's what I'm going to do.
That's right.
I'm going to ask my other questions since you have a question about Graydon. That way, I'm not.
Okay.
I don't want to ever. Here's the part of me that's not the good guy. I don't want to ever do to you what you did to me. So I'm not going to steal your question. Not going to steal your question. All right.
Okay.
So
all
right. When the crone died, when the old woman who was somehow associated with the worm and all of that, as she died, she said that making Eric the harbinger was always in the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And when he dies and we bring him back to life, he has some very noticeable scars that are on him now. That hard for me not to believe maybe that's connected to the crone still having some hold on him. So as we look at what's going to possibly happen in the next episode, what do you think is going on with Eric? Is she still have some hold on him? And what do you think, if so, what do you think might play out? And if not, what role do you think he'll play?
Here's something I've learned, Mark, from movies and series like this. You don't get to kiss a beautiful person who turns out to be this dusty crypt kind of thing without there being some lingering after effects. Once you have kissed that being, they somehow get into your soul. And so I think that this crone has somehow entered into Eric, and that there are going to be residual effects, and that Eric is now going to have a connection with the worm, but it's not going to be immediately obvious to those around him, and it is going to reveal its ways at first subtle and growingly more noticeable ways throughout the second season as he becomes more of a harbinger. And I think by the end of the second season, they will exorcise the worm out of him. What do you think?
Well, I suspect you're right, particularly by the end of the second season. I actually have, and here I go saying I'm not going to steal your question, but I actually have this theory about Eric and what's going to happen that involves Graydon. So should I hold off on that for your question?
Yes. Hold off.
Okay.
Because here's
right.
my question. This is a great transition. This is what I want to know, Mark.
All right, here we go.
So I want to know at the end, Graydon is in this place with the worm, and he sees Elora. I want to know, is that really Elora? Is Graydon still alive? Does he have some kind of a deep connection with the worm? And you're about to explain it all to us anyway. So I'm ready to know, Mark.
All right, so here's my theory anyway.
Okay.
No, that is not Elora. That's some evil. I think that is some manifestation of the worm, in as much as the crone was some manifestation, and it may even still be the crone just in whatever that hellscape was that they're in. And she's going to try to win Graydon over. I think what's going to happen is that the folks that are back with Willow are going to start to figure out through some clues and stuff. They're going to start figuring out that maybe Graydon isn't dead. Maybe he's in another universe, an alternate universe, or a living afterlife or something. And I think what's going to happen is I'm with you. I think that once you kiss evil, the evil is within you unless it gets cast out in some way in these storylines. And so I do think Eric is going to have this evilness in him. And what we're going to see is him convincing everyone that what we need to do is go rescue Graydon. And you do that by opening that door again and letting him out. But what he's really going to be doing is trying to let the evil version of Elora out. So that's where I think we go with the first several episodes, maybe even the first half of next season. Does it see it? Is that feasible?
I think that sounds great, and like that's a very likely possibility for what's going to happen. We have just written their season 2 for them, so all they need to do is tune into the Moonshine Jesus Show, and we have given them their plots for the season.
And send us our residual checks for writing it for them.
That's right. I've heard that pays better than
I think it does than what we do. Yeah, I think it might pay a little bit.
I'm hearing like a questioning of call, Mark. Like, should I be here? Is this the right thing? Should I listen to
the right person offer me the right job for the right money? You never know. Maybe my calling isn't as solid as I thought it was.
Well, this has been fun. I've really enjoyed talking with you about Willow, Mark, and we've got some exciting news for people. So here's something you all need to know, especially if you live in Southern California. Okay, so if you live in Southern California, this is exciting news for you because this week, Mark and I are going to be together in person. And so we thought, hey, while we're together, we should really do a live episode of the Moonshine Jesus Show because it is so much more fun to be like in the same room with each other and in the same room with other people. So on Sunday, we're going to be meeting in San Diego, California at a bar called Uptown Tavern in Hillcrest of San Diego. And around noon, we're going to eat, we're going to drink, and we're going to talk some theology and politics. And you want to tell them what we're going to be talking about, Mark?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. I am a gamer. I love video games. And probably one of the biggest movies and TV shows are notorious about taking a video game and absolutely destroying it and making it no good anymore. But every now and there's the rare exception, and recently that rare exception has happened, at least based on the early reviews. It is a show called The Last of Us. It's a very dystopian kind of setting for The Last of Us. It takes place about 20 years after modern civilization has basically been destroyed. It has a lot to do with, imagine this, a virus or some sickness that's going around. And so the main character, one of the main characters, Joel, sort of a hardened survivor kind of guy, he's hired to smuggle this 14-year-old girl, Ellie, out of this sort of oppressive quarantine zone. And as you might expect, a really interesting relationship begins to form as they head out. And there's 2 episodes available now. They're an hour each. So this will be one of those cool things where we can talk about it early on. You and I can kind of forecast what we think is going to happen. And then when the season's over, we can come back and review and talk about the full season, but also see where our hits and misses were. For me, that's always fun. I don't know what you think.
I love it because we just made a bunch of projections about Willow, but here's the thing: we're gonna have to wait like a year to see if,
at least,
we were right, and we're gonna forget by then. Yeah. But if it's just a month or so, we can still kind of hold on, and we can say Mark was wrong about that.
We say that a lot. And I'm okay with it.
It's actually usually the other way. I think Caleb did not get that. Mark got it. Okay, so we're going to talk about this on Sunday at noon. We're going to do a live broadcast, but we'll also post this in all the usual places during our usual Moonshine Jesus times on Monday. Okay, friends, thanks for joining us for Moonshine Jesus. I can't wait to see you on Sunday if you're there. If not, we'll just see you on the next Moonshine Jesus show.
Moonshine Jesus.